Hi, Taylor Elwood with Sovereign Submission here, and today I want to talk about the importance of making your voice be heard. Your wants matter. What you want matters as a man and as a submissive man, but it only matters when you speak up. I recently saw a conversation on Substack, and the person shared that that submissive men or just men in general don't know what they want, and then they go into a relationship and they expect that their want, like when they're being dominated, that their wants will be satisfied by their dominant, but then they don't seem to realize that what they've actually done is given over control of those wants to their dominant. I thought it was an interesting comment. One of the most important things that I've discovered in my men's work journey, and it does relate to this, is that men in general don't really know what they want. And a lot of times they struggle to express what they want because they're not even clear on it for themselves, let alone with anyone else. So I think it's actually really important for a man to be able to express what he wants. It doesn't mean that he's going to get it. It doesn't mean that he's going to automatically get what he wants, and that's also an important thing to accept. But what it does mean is that he's able to express himself clearly and cleanly. And when a man does that, when he expresses himself clearly and cleanly, what he's really doing is he's saying, like, look, I can show up in a really powerful and meaningful way regardless of whether or not I get something I want. What I see a lot of men do is not express what they want. And sometimes it's because they don't know what they want. Sometimes it's because they're afraid they won't get what they want, or they're afraid they'll be rejected or abandoned or broken up with or divorced if they share what they want. And really, I'm gonna say to that like if you have that fear, it's like really worth exploring. Why are you in a relationship where you can't fully express what you want? Why are you settling for less? Yet a lot of men will. I've been that man. My second marriage was a good example of that. I went into that relationship with the idea that I was going to be in a polyamorous open relationship, and she ended up giving me an ultimatum a year in that a year in which we were essentially monogamous anyway. And I was kind of like 6 months in, I was chafing at that. But she was like, if you want to be with me, you have to accept that we're going to be monogamous. I'm not willing to take risks. Now, granted, part of it was because basically she'd gotten an STD. And that was because of my previous experiences and stuff. So I could understand that, but in a lot of ways, what really ended up happening is we didn't have a conversation. I can't fully blame that on her though, because I didn't speak up and say this is what I want and this is what I need and like this is important to me. I caved, and part of the reason I caved was because I was afraid at the time of having to basically figure out what I was going to do for my situation financially. I was self-employed, but I didn't have enough of a stable base of clients. And so I was reliant upon her income in a lot of ways. And I let that fear and that reliance put me into a compromising position where I compromised on my values and my desires and wants and needs, where what I could have done instead is said, okay, if that's how you feel, then this isn't going to work because this is important to me and I'm willing to walk away. Understanding that in walking away, I would need to go out there and find some job and find a way to meaningfully support myself. Like that would have been a reality. And I could have done that. I could have made that choice, but I didn't. It was a really good lesson for me that basically took 10 years for me to learn. I didn't express what I wanted. I wasn't clear and clean. It ended up coming out sideways. I ended up cheating on her anyway. I wasn't faithful to her. And I don't say that to shame myself because I accept the responsibility that I didn't. I also accept that in some ways, I allowed that situation to occur and I didn't stay in integrity with myself. And there were things that she did as well that created complications in that relationship. those are her things to work through and own and take responsibility for. But I can take responsibility for my end of things. And I think it's really important that on our journey to discover what it is that we want, we also take responsibility for all the times that we didn't actually speak up for what we wanted. Because when we don't speak up for what we want, we are essentially compromising ourselves in a lot of ways. We are setting ourselves up for a relational failure because we're abandoning ourselves in the hope that we're not going to be abandoned by whoever we're with, but we're also essentially abandoning them too because we're not giving them the full presence and integrity that we need to be giving them. So I think it's really important for men to recognize that and take ownership of it. And whether you're a submissive man or you're a man who identifies in some other ways, this applies. Like, it doesn't really, this is kind of a universal truth for men, regardless of how you orient. But I also share this because as a submissive man, you don't get off the hook when it comes to your wants and desires and expressing them because you're submissive. It's not like you'd be like, well, I gave up control, so I can't do anything about that anyway. No, if anything, you have to be more in integrity because you have, even if she chooses not to give you what you want, you basically are on the hook for speaking to what you want. And it doesn't mean that you'll get it. She may not give it to you right away. She may not ever give it to you, and that may be something that you have to live with and accept. Or you may end up having to come to a point of clarity and being like, this isn't the kind of relationship I want. And guess what? As a submissive man, you get to make that choice. You get to make that choice because you are still a sovereign man. This is one of the reasons why I talk about sovereign submission. We are sovereign men in the sense that we are able to make the choice to walk away when something isn't working. In fact, we owe it to ourselves to respect and honor our truths and our desires and our needs and our wants from that place of sovereignty. We're a submissive man in that we choose to give those over in sacred trust to the person that we're with or people that we're with, and that we're willing to surrender some of that control and that expectation and other things like that is an act of release and an act of honor and trust, and also an act of empowerment on our parts. And you're not let off the hook. You don't get to just surrender and not speak up for what you want. If anything, surrendering is speaking up for what you want. It is sharing what you want in a very real, powerful way. And I think that this is like one of the things that men in general stumble with. Like, oh, if I share what I really want, I might receive it, and a lot of men have trouble with receiving. We'll get into that another time. But secondly, like, sometimes what ends up happening is we don't really own the full extent of our desires. And so as a result, we're not able to show up in the full service and presence that a submissive dynamic requires of us. If you're in a submissive man, like, how can you possibly show up with the full presence and service that she deserves if you don't share what you truly and genuinely want? In my experience, you can't. It significantly sets you up for failure when you try to do anything but that. So share that so that you understand that. And, one thing I would share with you that I have is a resource. It's called the Hard Conversation Playbook. You can get a link below. And it's a book that's designed to give you some scripts if you're having issues with speaking your truth and speaking up for what you genuinely want. The other thing, though, that I would suggest to you that might be helpful is speaking up for, learning to actually sit with the discomfort around what you want and being able to still speak up for it, and being able to, like, be in a conversation where you might feel uncomfortable. And if that's something that is of interest to you, I have a class coming up on January 22nd called Speak So She Can Hear You, or So She Can Feel You, actually. Speak So She Can Feel You. And the idea really is, this is how we bring presence to our relationship. We speak up for what is important to us, and we bring that presence in. If that's something that's of interest to you, please, check out the link below. And love to see you on there. And remember, man, regardless of whatever else you do, the most important thing to remember is that you have a voice. Speak. You don't have to get it right. You just have to speak it And, if you're trying to get it right, that actually is right there a symptom that you're abandoning yourself. So you don't want to be doing that. All right. Thank you for watching, and love to receive any comments on this that draw you in.